Hi, my name is Joe Sechrist, and I'd like to talk to you today about FERPA. FERPA stands for Family, Educational, Rights, and Privacy Act. FERPA is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of students' education records. FERPA is a federal law found in Title 20 of the United States Code. The federal regulations are found in Title 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Both the text of the law and its regulations are helpful to understand how to comply. FERPA gives parents and eligible students the right to 1. Prevent the disclosure of personally identifiable information from their educational records without consent. 2. Access to view and inspect student educational records. And 3. Request correction of these educational records. FERPA applies to all schools that receive federal funding for any program administered by the Department of Education. FERPA rights transfer to the student when he or she reaches the age of 18, attends a post-secondary institution at any age, or the higher education institutions can release a student's educational record to both parents, provided one claims the student as a dependent for tax purposes. However, there are some papers that need to be filled out for that to happen. FERPA prevents disclosure of information from a student's education record, but does not prevent disclosure of directory information. When we talk about education records, they are records directly related to a student that are maintained by the school or by a third-party vendor on behalf of the school. FERPA prohibits release of education records without consent of parents or the eligible student. Education records include student grades, immunization and health records, disciplinary records, student progress reports, academic or physical testing results, grade point average, and attendance records. Common examples of directory information include, and I'm not going to read all of them, but your student's name, address, telephone number, and date of birth, along with some others that are listed on here. So how does FERPA impact the classroom? Well, teachers need to keep any student data you have secure. Teachers need to store student data and information using your school's data management systems. Be careful to not email information to unverified parent email addresses. Be sure you're not accidentally disclosing student information to the wrong people. Teachers need to keep any physical graded materials or grade books in secure and safe places. And teachers should not discuss student information with others unless that person has a legitimate educational goal. So who enforces FERPA? Well, FERPA is administered by the Family Policy Compliance Office, the FPCO, in the Department of Education. If a complaint is filed against your school, the FPCO may investigate your school's procedures to determine what action should be taken. School officials work to appropriately balance student data privacy with school security. Schools have a great deal of flexibility under FERPA to disclose students' data and education records in certain settings. In the context of school safety, FERPA makes an exception to its restrictions on data sharing should knowledge of such information be necessary to protect the health or safety of students or other persons in connection with an emergency. The confusion surrounding FERPA creates barriers to information sharing and collaboration and hampers the ability to prevent potential acts of violence. FERPA and cyber threats. FERPA states that districts are responsible for keeping student data safe from identity theft, fraud, and extortion. This is becoming more difficult with at least 10 school districts being in the news for ransomware attacks and data theft. With the explosion of the use of tech tools, there's increased disclosures happening, and that data isn't really being protected. FERPA and surveillance cameras. Courts have generally upheld video recordings in school hallways, stairwells, school buses, school parking lots, and even classrooms. These areas are considered public places, and actions are in plain view. Images of students captured on surveillance recordings qualify as educational records when photo or video is directly related to a student and maintained by the educational institution. The use of audio surveillance recordings raises other legal issues and potentially creates criminal liability for unwary administrators. In the two-party consent states, all parties need to consent to the recording to avoid criminal liability. As far as FERPA and immigration go, the U.S. Department of Justice and U.S. Department of Education issued guidance in 2014 to remind districts of the federal obligation to provide equal educational opportunities to all children residing within their district. This means that even SROs are not required to report undocumented students, as schools are considered a sensitive location in which immigration and customs enforcement agents are to refrain from enforcement actions unless there is an extraordinary circumstance involving public safety. FERPA and vendors. FERPA is important, and school districts need to be careful with the vendors that they choose. Districts are warned that under FERPA, schools are responsible for what their vendors do with data. That means if a vendor intentionally or accidentally misuses student education records, the school would still be at fault. Carefully screening vendors to make sure they are FERPA compliant can help. Among the questions they should ask are how the vendor gives parents and students access to records, and how it prevents unauthorized people from accessing their records. Schools should also be careful with online vendors such as apps and websites that offer free services. Those services might appear free on the surface, but the vendor could be getting paid in educational records or mining the data to sell to third parties, another violation. In conclusion, administrators are responsible to keep schools safe, and this includes the data of the students who walk through the doors every day. Thank you.